Hope everybody's doing well today. I want to welcome everybody to the Unimpressed podcast. And today we have Dr. Izabella Wentz calling in from Austin, Texas. And she just wrote a book, and she's going to talk about her book called The Adrenal Transformation Protocol. So welcome, Izabella. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you so much for having me.
So we had a little bit of a conversation before we got on here, and you said you're originally from where?
I'm from Poland originally, and then I came to Chicago, which is like Poland 2.0. And then I've lived all over the United States. I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in Phoenix, Colorado. I'm in Austin, Texas now, and I've also lived in the Netherlands.
Nice. And how long have you been in Austin, Texas?
I have been here for about 6 months. But the funny thing is, I almost moved here 2 other times. So once right after I finished pharmacy school, my husband and I were planning to move here. And then another time right before we moved back to Chicago, we were planning to move to Austin. So I guess third time is a charm. We're finally here.
This book and this information that you've kind of put out to the world, how did this originate and where did you get this direction from?
My book is focused on adrenal transformation. And so that might sound a bit vague, right? And my first kind of encounter with the adrenals and what they do and their role in creating energy in our bodies came about over a decade ago when I was a young pharmacist who was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, an autoimmune condition that impacts the thyroid gland. And I had chronic fatigue syndrome and just was not feeling my best in my 20s. And somebody came to me and said, one of the healthcare professionals I was working with, and said, have you looked into adrenal fatigue? Do you think you might have that? And so I went on Google and I looked up adrenal fatigue, and Google said it doesn't exist, right? It's not a thing. It doesn't, it's a quack diagnosis. It's not real. And me being a pharmacist, I was like, okay, so this isn't a real thing and I'm just going to move on, right? Maybe I'll find other ways to support my energy levels. And I had brain fog and fatigue and unrefreshing sleep, even though I was sleeping 11 hours a night. And this anxiety and just kind of this suppressed vitality, right? I just wasn't feeling like a 20-year-old should have been feeling. And finally, another person mentioned this adrenal fatigue thing. And maybe it was the 15th person. I finally was like, okay, fine, I'll try it, right? I was kind of desperate. I was like, I'll try anything at this point to feel better because I feel so awful. I'm so exhausted all the time. And I tried the recommendations for adrenal fatigue and holy cow, they worked. So I actually felt better. My brain fog went away. I had energy. My anxiety stabilized. And I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to be human. And at that point, I started writing my first book, The Hashimoto's The Root Cause. And I talked about all the different things I did to help myself get into remission from Hashimoto's and feel my best. And then I've been talking about adrenals and adrenal dysfunction and how to grow your energy levels for the past decade. But in the last few years, this became really a big, important thing for me to share. Because as a new mom, I found myself, again, really tired and exhausted. And I realized that some of the other old recommendations I used to give people for recovering their energy levels, I couldn't really do. I couldn't quit coffee as a new mom. I couldn't sleep for 10 hours to recover as a new mom. I was waking up all night. I couldn't utilize hormones, which is from my pharmacist training in integrative medicine, that's what I was recommending was hormones, quit caffeine, and get off of, try to sleep as much as you can. So I created this new protocol initially to help myself thrive. And now I've piloted it with over 3,500 people. And it really takes people out of that stressed survival burnout mode and shifts their bodies into more of a healing, resting, digesting, thriving mode. So I had to get the word out.
Breaking down Hashimoto's, because my brother has Hashimoto's, and breaking that down, what does that actually look like from a balance standpoint? Because when things happen, it's an imbalance in the system.
Absolutely. When somebody has Hashimoto's, that usually means their thyroid gland is under attack by the immune system. And this eventually results in thyroid gland not being able to produce thyroid hormone. Now, thyroid hormone impacts every cell in our body. It runs our metabolism. It helps to generate heat in our bodies. And typically a person with Hashimoto's might be told after some time, if they're properly diagnosed, that they have a sluggish thyroid, and they may get recommended a medication like levothyroxine. But the way that they feel is they're going to be fatigued. They're going to have trouble with day-to-day tasks. They might have hair loss. They might have weight gain. So they're doing all the same exercise as everybody else is doing, but they're still gaining weight, right? Men typically will say that their libido really suffers, that they can't grow facial hair as well as that they used to grow facial hair. They're having muscle wasting and muscle mass wasting. And women typically, the biggest things women complain about are like the brain fog and fatigue and the extra weight gain. The things and this is kind of what doctors are really aware of, and the person with these symptoms might get diagnosed. Cold intolerance is a big red flag. Loss of your upper eyebrows is a big red flag, and hair loss is also a big red flag. But there are also other things that happen in the beginning stages that I'm really hoping to raise awareness about, and this is miscarriages in women. So a lot of times women in their 30s, they're not diagnosed with a thyroid condition. They're not even tested for a thyroid condition, where that can cause multiple miscarriages. It can cause trouble conceiving. It can cause developmental issues with the babies. So this is something that's super, super important and relevant. And then in people in their 20s, a lot of times the very first symptoms of Hashimoto's are going to be obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, anxiety attacks, and maybe some kind of a depression, right? When the thyroid gland is under attack by the immune system, this results in thyroid hormones being broken down, and then they get dumped into our bloodstream. Now, thyroid hormones, when we have too much of them, we feel really anxious and irritable. And this is kind of what's happening, where you just get this immune attack and you get dosages of excess doses of thyroid hormone dumped in, and people will go to the doctors and they'll say, I feel anxious, and they'll get prescribed an antidepressant. When if the doctor were to do comprehensive work, they would say, let's test you for thyroid antibodies. And holy cow, are these thyroid antibodies elevated? Let's work on getting them normalized. Let's work on that autoimmune inflammation in your body to lower that response. So you're not going to feel anxious. So you're not going to have all of these weird mood swings, prevent multiple miscarriages, and so on and so forth. And this is a passion topic for me, as you can tell.
Awesome. I love the passion. I think one thing people don't look at is environment. And I think a lot of times environment is a big factor in most things that people carry to this world, from their parents. Is there something that they've looked at environmentally that may be, causing this problem? There
are a lot of environmental factors that have been connected to Hashimoto's and autoimmunity. So various toxins in our environment can be triggering. Things like excess fluoride can suppress thyroid function. Sometimes gluten proteins can cross-react with thyroid anatomy on our thyroid gland, and that can result in some cross-linking. If somebody's gluten sensitive, for example, or has celiac disease and they're still eating gluten, then their immune system attacks the gluten and anything that looks like it, including the thyroid gland, because there are some similar protein sequences with that. And then there are also things like internal triggers. So a very common infection known as H. pylori, which can be exacerbated by stress. Typically people hear of it, it could cause ulcers. But this has also been implicated in autoimmune thyroid conditions and can be a really relevant trigger for Hashimoto's, as well as Graves' disease, which is a different type of autoimmune condition.
Well, when you think about that, you think about the fluoride. Why the hell is it still in toothpaste? You know what I mean? Think about that. That's pretty wild. Is there any definition about the fluoride situation, or do they just know that this type of substance can create this type of situation in people?
I think public health officials always are trying their best to keep a population healthy, and I do think they have good intentions. And so they've done things like adding fluoride because it can prevent and stabilize some cavities. But then if you use it in doses that are too high, so if you're getting it from your toothpaste and from your water supply and so on and so forth, then you can end up with actually doses that can suppress thyroid function. And it's a dose-related response, right? And then similar thing with iodine, the public health officials are like, okay, we don't want anybody to be iodine deficient. Let's put some iodine in the salt supply. And a lot of times iodine is a narrow therapeutic index nutrient too. And so people will end up with actually flares up in Hashimoto's when they have too much iodine. And there have been studies in countries before they added iodine to the salt supply, and then after, and the rates of Hashimoto sometimes double, triple, quadruple. So I feel like it's always a double-edged sword when we try to do one thing to benefit maybe a subset of the population. We're all unique individuals, right? And we all respond differently. So if we have the genetic predisposition for Hashimoto's, that can get expressed whenever we're taking in those lower amounts of fluoride and of iodine that perhaps other people in our population might be helped by or not affected by, right? Or not affected in the same ways. For me, it's very interesting to see how that's been approached in the United States. When I lived in the Netherlands, one of the things they said about fluoride and the water supply, they said, we don't add drugs to our water. We just don't do that, right? Where the US has a slightly different stance on that, where sure, we can add fluoride to our water, right?
Well, I've had this big thing recently. A lot of people from Italy have been put in front of me. Obviously, they call themselves Italians, and I think most of the people from Italy are indigenous people because they've kept a pure source in their country, and I think that's a big deal. And I'm not sure about where you're from and the country you're talking about. You said the Netherlands, right?
I'm from Poland. I lived in
Poland, but you said you were in, where would you say you were in this conversation just now? What country was that?
The Netherlands. I lived there
Netherlands.
for a while as well.
Yeah, I mean, living there, the differences in the Netherlands than here. Do you think they protect their people a little better in a way? That's kind of could be a deep-rooted question, but it's like in Italy they don't let GMOs into the country. Are there things like that in the Netherlands that the country doesn't let in? It keeps their people, protects their people in a way.
I think there's a lot of things that other countries do differently from the United States that many Americans may not be aware of. And so things like, not adding fluoride to the water supply, this is mostly done in the United States and parts of the UK and not the rest of the European countries. And then direct to consumer drug commercials. If you grew up in America, you're used to seeing those on the television, or you're going through a magazine, or you're perhaps scrolling the internet and you see a drug ad. Did you know that the only two countries that allow direct-to-consumer drug advertising are United States and New Zealand? So the rest of the world doesn't, it's not allowed. Like you're trained pharmacist, and I was very surprised about learning how different government agencies and how differently different countries treat their citizens and what's allowed in one country and what's not allowed in another country.
And all these things, how much studying have you done? Because you are very defined in these narratives. I mean, this has been a lifelong process. For how long studying this information for you? How long has this been?
Wow. I guess I first became passionate about health as a young girl. My mom was a physician in Poland. And so I always knew I wanted to help people with their health. So even as a little girl, somebody would come to our house and needed wound care or something. They got hurt, and my mom would say, Izabella, come help me, right? And so I would bring the Band-Aids over, right? And I was like a 3-year-old medical assistant in my mind. So I just have always been super passionate about that. But I am in my 40s, and I would say most of my career, I started working as a pharmacy technician at age 16. So more than 20 years. It doesn't seem like more than 20 years because I think I still feel 22, right? It's been quite a few years since I started learning about health, and it's a huge passion of mine.
Well, I mean, I think that speaks to your foundation and speaks to your thoroughness about this subject. And in writing this book, what are you trying to teach people? I mean, we talked about the Hashimoto and what that is specifically, and what is your overall agenda? Because if the medical system's narratives are not defined the right way, I think a lot of this type of information is going to come out, and I think people like you, thought leaders in these spaces, are going to be the education pieces to maybe help change some of these medical narratives? I mean, what is your position and what is your goal with this current book you have out?
My goal is to really help people who are struggling with brain fog and fatigue, maybe trouble waking up in the morning. They feel like their vitality's gone. They are anxious, irritable. They're having trouble falling asleep, and they're going through life with some of these symptoms that are quote unquote common, right? But they're not normal symptoms. Like, we should feel energized and present and vital and have really great sleep and have energy to do the things that we want to do and things that we enjoy. And it should be a calm energy, right? And so we should feel good. And I want to let people know that there is a way to tap into that. And just because, the way that our modern society is set up, a lot of us are in that survival mode, right? So we're kind of feeling burned out. And I want to teach people how to shift out of that into more of a thriving state where you feel energetic, fit, calm once more, and that this can be done in like 3 to 4 weeks. So even if you've been sick for 10 plus years, there are very specific things that you can do just to tap into making yourself feel, basically what you need to do is make yourself feel safe in order to thrive.
How does this affect you mentally? When you go from a point of a mental state of not having energy, not being able to do the things that you want to do, to having that, what do you think that does to the psyche of a person?
Well, I could tell you time and time again, people sometimes in their 20s, sometimes in their 70s that have gone through my program, it's just like a light bulb goes off and they're able to finally follow their dreams. And they can do the things that they didn't think they could, and things become possible for them. So I have women that become like first-time authors in their 70s, or, they're like, finally, I could spend time with my horses. I haven't been able to take care of my horses for 10 years. And they can follow their dreams and goals when they sort of awaken from that really fatigued, sleeping tired woman state. And, they say when sleeping women awaken, they can move mountains. And that's what happens when people get their vitality and energy back. They can live on their own terms and they could do all of the things that they dreamed about. I mean, personally, so I've helped lots of people get to that place. And personally, in my own health, in my 20s, I had chronic fatigue. So I know what that's like. I was going to work, coming home exhausted, right? I would sit on the couch, eat some food, watch some TV, go to bed by 9. The next morning, I crawl out of bed by 8 a.m. exhausted and kind of repeat the pattern. And I had goals and aspirations and dreams of things I wanted to do, but I just had to guard my energy. So I didn't have enough energy for friendships. I didn't have enough energy to write. I'd always wanted to write, and I just didn't have the brain capacity or energy. And everything in my day-to-day life felt like a chore. It felt overwhelming. And so really recovering my energy has allowed me to be the person that I am today. I have a family. I have a beautiful son. I have a husband I adore. I have friends. I have books that I've written. I've been able to start a supplement company, and I'm able to inspire other people because I took charge of my own health, right? And so I want people to be able to follow their dreams.
All right. So walk me through. If someone's, all right, we have Hashimoto's, what's the first thing someone needs to do? Walk me through a little bit of this.
Definitely, if somebody just got diagnosed, I would recommend taking some time to connect with your feelings, perhaps grieving, just kind of let it all out. I feel a lot of us tend to suppress our feelings. And then when we don't process our feelings properly, they can kind of weigh down on us and prevent us from really taking action. So kind of, really connect with yourself and really be present to all the feelings that come up. Are you scared? Are you disappointed? Are you frustrated? Be present to all of that. And then once you've gone through that opportunity to be present to that, comfort yourself, to let yourself know that you're going to be okay, and then focus on your healing. So focus on creating some space for healing. And then you would do things. I would say that one of the best things you can do is getting off of inflammatory foods and balancing your blood sugar. Most people that have been eating the standard American diet and standard Western diet, we just eat too much sugar, right? So bread turns into sugar, right? All of these things turn into sugar in our bodies, and that puts us on a blood sugar roller coaster.
Everything except red wine.
Learning to tune into your body and seeing what makes your body feel good. And for most people, it's making sure that you're eating plenty of protein and fat throughout your day. And sometimes that can help you with your energy and can help you let go of your fatigue, let go of some of that weight gain, can help reduce the autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland. If you're sensitive to foods like gluten and dairy, many people are, especially people with fatigue, because these foods are very challenging for the digestive system. If you're full of energy and your energy is good and you're eating these foods, it works for you, it works for you. If you're exhausted, there's a chance that it's because you're not digesting your food properly. Because digestion is a really big impact, takes a lot of our energy. And when we don't digest our foods properly, we can end up with this fatigue. So getting rid of some of the more difficult to digest foods is something that I would recommend. And utilizing smoothies to give yourself some of that protein and fat and some of the micronutrients as perhaps your breakfast. This can actually liberate a lot of your energy because smoothies are pre-digested. And so you're saving up on digestion. And this is incredible for how people just utilizing some of these things will find that they have so much more energy. They don't feel exhausted, right?
Now, my friend, Dave Sandoval, he's a leading superfood guy. His company is Purium Health Products. His biggest thing is no dairy, no soy. He doesn't even entertain those two things. And when you think about dairy, everybody, eats dairy to, a large size of the population eats dairy. And there's so much soy in foods. Does soy have a play in this as well that it causes an issue?
Soy can be problematic for people with thyroid issues. It can cause, there have been studies done in infants fed soy formula that they had higher rates of Hashimoto's and thyroid issues later on in life. Of course, we don't know 100% that it causes it, but I have seen in my clients that soy does tend to flare up that autoimmune response and does tend to increase antibodies. So people can actually connect to, what's going on in their bodies if they have Hashimoto's based on their anxiety levels. If you're feeling anxious, right, after eating a certain food, there's a good chance that food is not your friend. Gluten, dairy, and soy are three of the most challenging proteins to digest. So soy is going to be a problematic food for a lot of people as well. I have noticed that people with Hashimoto's do tend to be sensitive to it. People can generally connect foods to how they feel. And foods that make you anxious when you're eating them, that's a good sign that they're flaring up your autoimmune response. So soy has been studied in infants who have drank soy formula that can increase their rates of thyroid issues later on in life. Gluten, dairy, and soy are some of the most difficult proteins to digest, and a lot of times they're highly processed. So they are three of the foods that getting rid of them from your day-to-day diet can actually liberate and get rid of a lot of that inflammation in your body and liberate some of that energy.
Now, Dave mentions, estrogen levels, and that soy is very bad for females. What do you think the connection with the estrogen levels and the thyroid? What is that connection that you might need to be worry about? Is there a connection there with that?
Definitely. So whenever somebody has too much estrogen, they might have something known as estrogen dominance. And if you're eating a lot of high estrogen foods, that can kind of stimulate that, including soy or taking supplements of that nature, or perhaps you're exposed to mycotoxins that can act like estrogen in your body, or any kind of other toxins in the environment, like some of the endocrine disrupting toxins. These can lead to more estrogen kind of symptoms and estrogen dominance in the body. This can definitely interfere with thyroid function and how the different thyroid hormones are bound up in the body. So part of, I go through in my first, second, and third book, I go through a lot of the different triggers that can be problematic for Hashimoto's, and estrogen dominance is something that's very relevant. And I think soy, potentially because of the estrogenic compound, estrogenic issue, as well as some of the digestive issues, it can be a problem food for people with Hashimoto's for sure.
So when you talk about triggers, Western medicine says that, when you first go to a doctor, they're like, what kind of diseases did your parents have or whatever? And I don't know completely if that narrative is true. I mean, they say DNA could be 10%. So is there a level of triggering, in someone? Is it the amount? Obviously, people's defense mechanisms are different because of the different balance. A trigger is obviously you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. So if you take out dairy, you take out soy, you take those two triggers out of your system. Is there anything else that someone may not know about?
So I love utilizing food as medicine. I think this can be incredibly helpful for people to heal. It's usually one of the first things I recommend is balancing your blood sugar and getting off of inflammatory foods. But if you don't have success with that, some people do go into a complete remission just by using food as medicine. There are other patterns and things that I like to focus on. One of them is balancing the stress response. So people with thyroid issues and people, in the general population, a lot of us might be stuck in that survival mode where we are in fight or flight all of the time, and our body just isn't tuned into stress properly, and our body gets overwhelmed with stress. So part of what a lot of people need to do beyond, and I would say this would be like, maybe step 2, when you get off of the inflammatory foods, you may want to really look at your stress response and really support that stress response. This is because when people have low levels of the stress hormone cortisol in their body, this can actually make them feel very, very exhausted and tired. And this can lead to autoimmune conditions and autoimmune inflammation. And when they have too much of the stress hormone cortisol in their body or stress perception, then their thyroid hormone receptors may be blocked. And then even if they have enough thyroid hormone on board, that may not interact with the receptors properly. And so a big part of what I also recommend is focusing on that stress response. So looking at what are the things in your day-to-day life that you're doing that are sending you in that stress overwhelm response, right? And so we go back through, okay, what are your daily habits? Like, do you find, what are you doing? Are you over-exercising? Because that could be perceived as stress for your body, right? If you feel more tired after your exercise, then that's going to be a stressor for you. Are you, we talked about eating the wrong foods, but sometimes it's not eating enough food. If you're on a calorie deficit, that could be sending the message to your body that you are in a famine, right? And so that could be your body, what do you do in a famine? How do you survive a famine? Is the body could respond by slowing down your metabolism, right? And the thyroid gland runs our metabolism. So the body's wisdom tries to slow down the metabolism when it senses a famine. And so part of turning that around is making sure that you're eating plenty of nourishing foods so that your body doesn't think it's in a famine. It kind of shifts out of that stress response and shifts more into a thriving state. And then I focus on utilizing nutrients that get depleted when somebody's in that stress response. And these are things like magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin C, and some electrolytes. This can be incredibly helpful, as well as utilizing adaptogens to raise the person's resilience and then restoring mitochondrial health. So I do a lot of mitochondrial support as well. And I found this can be very helpful for a person with Hashimoto's who struggles with their energy levels and fatigue, is to really support them, support their thyroid function, support their adrenal function, support their stress response, and support the mitochondria.
I have 2 more questions that just popped in my head, but I'm going to combine these 2 questions. One is, looking at your creative, how do you pull off the creative with your socials with this narrative, which I thought was very unique and interesting to me? And the other thing is, when people start these protocols, sometimes it's hard. I think that first 60 to 90 days when you're trying to attack anything is very, very hard. But if you can get past the initial thing, how do you implement that in your life with how you live now, like full functionality?
So it always is tricky to start new things. And I think one of the things I recommend is preparing first. So, if you're trying to go sugar-free, don't keep a bunch of sugar in your house, right?
Yeah.
And have some alternatives. Prepare for yourself. If you know that you're going to want to go gluten-free and dairy-free, then make sure you have snacks that you can eat right in your house or wherever you're going, so you're not in a bind. And perhaps that's sitting down with some cookbooks, perhaps that's sitting down with my book and going through some of the recommendations or downloading some of the bonuses that I offer that go through like how to actually prepare. Because I feel like if people don't prepare properly, then, if you don't plan for success, then there's a chance you might fail if you don't plan properly. If you're just like, I'm just going to do it tomorrow without having done a plan.
So get Izabella's book first, then prepare properly. And then, like I said, the creative, some of the content I saw, I thought was very unique and interesting. And you don't look like you're in your 40s. You look like you're like 28 or something like that. By the way, where do you come up with your creative for the videos and to express your narrative and your personality? Where does that come from? Just, what is your thought process on that? It's
a lot of fun. And so I will have random ideas at random times. The tricky part is getting them all out, right? Just having the time to get all of the ideas out that I have. But I typically will think of something that I want to share that I think would be relevant and helpful. My goal is to always be as helpful as I possibly can. That's kind of the filter that my content goes through, is like, is this helpful? Is this inspiring? And I try to go from that. Some things do really well, some things not so much. Sometimes people don't get it, right? Sometimes I try to be funny, which I think I'm a funny person. It doesn't always translate in like blog writing or some articles, but it's been fun on short form video to be able to show some of my funny side, which you can do like in podcasts and in videos, but not every. It's interesting because I started off with Facebook and as a blogger 10 years ago. And so that was one form, right? So that was blog is long form writing, and Facebook was more of that as well. And now with being more on Instagram and doing podcasts, a little bit of TikTok, it's kind of a different skill set, right? I always just try to be very empowering of people. And I feel like we can talk about things and be sad about them and kind of get into that victim state. And my goal is to always empower people and show them how they can heal and show them what's possible. And sometimes that might be cracking a joke, right? Sometimes that might be getting them to smile. When we get kind of bogged down and stuck in, oh, I feel so bad today. I feel so bad for myself. Sometimes just seeing something a little bit silly can get a person to shift away from that and shift them, laughter is medicine, right? Get them to laugh a little bit. And that actually shifts them from that survival mode into thriving mode, even for a split second. You do that enough times a day and you're going to feel amazing, right?
And if someone wants to find your book and your information, how do we find your book?
Sure. My book is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold. And my website is thyroidpharmacist.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and just starting off a little bit on TikTok as well. But I'm mostly active on Facebook and Instagram.
And your recent book is called?
Adrenal Transformation Protocol. It's a 4-week plan to release stress symptoms and go from surviving to thriving. And I have a copy of it here. Let's see.
Flash that up on the screen there. Very cool. Izabella Wentz. Nice. Well, I think you got a lot more things coming your way, and you're going to have an opportunity to put that narrative even out more to the world. And whoever was listening today, hopefully they learned something, and I appreciate you coming on the show. This has been Dr. Izabella Wentz, and I'm John Edmonds Cosma, the CEO of Bang Productions.